fine, I'll talk about Bumblebee. Since Michael Bay left the Transformers franchise in 2017 after the release of The Last Knight, we have gotten 3 theatrically released Transformers films. And I've gotten many a request to talk about Rise of the Beasts, but I feel that in order to do that, I need to first talk about the first installment in this new continuity, Bumblebee. For the first time in live-action Transformers history, there was a new creative team involved in this franchise. Travis Knight, director of Kubo and the Two Strings, stepped in as the director of this film, and screenwriter Christina Hodson took over writing duties. The movie threw out everything we had seen previously and positioned itself as a prequel, despite the fact that it's not a prequel. So Hasbro and Paramount have sort of walked back these comments now that Rise of the Beast is out and is very clearly a different continuity. But in 2018, they were insistent that this movie is a prequel to the Bay films. And I'm not saying that the Bay films have perfect continuity because, oh boy, they don't. But trying to fit Bumblebee into that continuity somehow makes The Last Knight seem like it makes sense. For example, Optimus discovered Earth in 1987, despite the fact that Bumblebee was on Earth in World War II fighting Nazis. Travis Knight also said that he elected not to put Megatron in the film because Megatron should be in the Hoover Dam at this point in time. Yet, when Bumblebee comes to Earth, Sector 7 has clearly never seen a Cybertronian before. Doesn't make sense. I'm insulted they even tried. I know why they tried. It's because the Michael Bay movies made money, but I'm insulted that they tried. Everything in Bumblebee, including the character designs, was different, and that was something that in 2018, me and a lot of other people were looking forward to because we had not seen live-action versions of these characters outside of what Michael Bay had done. And it was at this moment that I realized I was still alive. While the Bay films showed us bits and pieces of the war for Cybertron, Bumblebee decided to open by throwing us completely into it. And to say that it's the best scene in the movie is not a lie. I have a lot of issues with the live-action versions of the G1 designs, but I think when they're on Cybertron, those designs work really well. I also don't think it's a coincidence that once Bumblebee comes to Earth, they completely ditch the notion of giving him his G1 design. Now, there is another Cybertron scene later on in the movie, but I think it just makes sense to talk about both of them up front here since the second scene picks up exactly where the first scene left off. Now, you're probably wondering, John, are you doing this so that you can talk about Ravage Eject as soon as possible? Yeah, you'd be right.
Ravage Eject.
God, he sounds so good. There is so much to love here. We get to see Ratchet, RC, Cliffjumper, Wheeljack. I think you can see Ironhide in the background, but I'm not totally sure. They really just give us all of these characters right out of the gate. We get to see the Seekers as well, which is awesome because the Bay films really didn't do anything with the Seekers, and one of my favorite shots in the whole film is the shot of Starscream, Soundwave, and Shockwave all together. Quick note, I do find it hilarious that Bumblebee is the only one without a name. I know that he's not named so that they can give him a name later on, but when you run around hearing Optimus and Cliffjumper and Ravage, it's really funny when Optimus then says this.
Where's B-127?
And I get that bumblebees don't exist on Cybertron, so it doesn't make sense he'd be named Bumblebee, but you can't use that reasoning if you're also going to give Optimus all of his Earth truck parts on Cybertron. And as the Autobots retreat and Optimus dives back into the battle, we get one final shot of Bumblebee looking back at his destroyed homeworld, completely saddened over everything that has happened, before we get one of the best title drops in the franchise. The Cybertron sequence is utterly phenomenal and is a perfect way to kick off this film and new continuity, but it also speaks to one of my biggest issues with the movie and why I can't bring myself to like it quite as much as I did when it first came out. To me, Bumblebee never gets better than this opening scene. And as much as I love seeing the war for Cybertron, giving people something they have so badly wanted to see for years, and then spending the next 90 minutes focusing on Haley Steinfeld and Bumblebee's hijinks, is a bit of a tonal disconnect that keeps me yearning for something the movie has no intention of giving me. I'll give more details later on because while I love the cute aspects of this movie, I feel like it loses itself a bit and forgets to be a Transformers movie in the process. But that's not to say it doesn't check off a lot of boxes as well. Now there's a structure to the way in which Transformers movies introduce stuff. Bay did it in the first movie and it stuck through the franchise. We get a Transformers-related prologue, then we get the title card. From there we meet the military presence for the movie and what they're up to when they come in contact with a Transformer, and then we meet the actual main character of the story. But before we can talk about Haley Steinfeld, we have to talk about John Cena. I love John Cena, and I love John Cena in this movie. I think he is the perfect fit for a Transformers film. The human characters in these movies have always had this sort of corniness and over-the-top nature to them, and I think John Cena plays that perfectly. And in fact, his performance in this movie definitely feels like a precursor to what he would do for Peacemaker several years down the line. By the way, Season 2 is great, and I love Bumblebee's whole arrival scene. I like that they skip past a bunch of the introductory stuff and just get straight into it. We've seen these movies before, we know what we're in for. Bumblebee scans a vehicle, he gets chased by these soldiers, and then a Decepticon that isn't Starscream but looks exactly like Starscream shows up. By the way, Blitzwing is my favorite Decepticon in this movie, despite his very limited screen time. I think he is leagues better than Shatter and Dropkick, who we'll talk about in a few minutes once they show up, and I wonder why he wasn't just the main villain. He's far more badass and intimidating than the actual main villains of the movie, and he also holds the title for the single coolest non-Optimus Prime moment in this film's runtime. And the scene culminates in Bumblebee losing his voice box. A moment that I can't help but wish happened later in the film. Dylan O'Brien does a great Bumblebee, and we've already had 5 films where Bumblebee can't speak. So I feel like there was a great opportunity here for Bumblebee to have his voice for a lot more of the movie than he does, so we could actually hear and see what Bumblebee is like before he became the Bumblebee that we know. This is a Bumblebee origin movie after all. I'd kind of hope for something a little different. And further on to the note of Bumblebee losing the ability to speak, I feel like that's a moment that should have gone to a much bigger Decepticon. Having a Decepticon who is not actually named on screen and was revealed through a tweet made by the director takes away from how impactful Bumblebee losing his voice box should have been. It's a moment that should have gone to Starscream or something, who is, by the way, the character that I firmly believe should have been the main villain of this movie. But once Bumblebee scans a beetle and falls unconscious, we are introduced to the 2 main characters of the Bumblebee movie, Charlie Watson and the 80s. Remember when Stranger Things made the 80s more popular than the 80s actually were? I'm glad that craze ended, because in rewatching the movie for this video, I just found myself rolling my eyes at how much this movie shoves the 80s down your throat. It was fun the first time, but every rewatch it gets just a little more annoying than it was the time before. But on to the actual main character, Charlie Watson, played by Haley Steinfeld. She's, first off, giving a phenomenal performance in this movie, and two, the character is really solid. But Charlie Watson is introduced in the same way that every live-action Transformers protagonist is introduced, as a complete loser. I really like Charlie. Her backstory is simple yet effective, her reason for hating her parents makes sense, and her chemistry with Bee is great. I still prefer Sam Witwicky over Charlie, but that could just be nostalgia because Charlie is much more of an actual developed, well-rounded out character than Sam ever was. But I'll always have a soft spot for Samuel James Witwicky. Now, her introduction is cheesy and full of tropes and cliches, but they work. It definitely helps that Travis Knight knows this movie isn't breaking any new ground. We should probably talk about that. If you've seen E.T., or The Iron Giant, or fucking Short Circuit, then you've seen Bumblebee. This movie is not doing a single new thing. And I get it. The formula works. It has since the dawn of time. Also, whenever someone says they hope E.T.'s never remade, I laugh. Because they already remade E.T. Do I wish they did something a bit more interesting? Yeah. But it does work. By the way, this shot is amazing. Now, before we can actually get to our main characters interacting, we have to talk about the funniest part of the entire movie. If I had a nickel for every time Cliff Jumper died at the start of a story to demonstrate the power of the main villains, I'd have 2 nickels, which isn't a lot, but it's really funny that it's happened twice. So much of this movie, arguably too much of this movie, takes place in Charlie's garage, just following Bee and Charlie hanging out. It's the formula this franchise has had from the beginning. A person who's really down on their luck and is an outcast, learning that their car is super dope. And it works here just as many times as it has before, and we get so many awesome and deep character moments between Charlie and Bumblebee in these garage scenes. It also contains one of the coolest transformations in one of these movies. The design for Bumblebee is pretty solid. In a movie with so many G1 cameos, abandoning Bumblebee's G1 design is hilarious. I don't know why so many people love the fact that they finally did G1 designs when the only actual G1 designs in the movie are in the first 3 minutes. They made Bumblebee shorter to match his new vehicle mode. They kept the head design from Bayformers but gave him these bigger, bluer, kind of more innocent eyes. And he still has a bunch of tiny parts, but for the most part they're hidden underneath all the yellow bits. And ILM was once again at the top of their game with the visual effects in this movie. Especially the close-ups on characters. I think Shatter and Dropkick look awesome. I think Bumblebee looks really awesome. I don't care what anyone says. That's a real robot that Haley Steinfeld interacted with. CGI has mostly been a standout in Transformers movies, and it's nice to know that 6 movies in, and these are still some of the best visual effects of the modern age. The first conversation, if we can really call it that, is beautiful and is one of the standouts from the movie. You're able to learn so much about Charlie and Bumblebee in such little time, and I like how long it takes Bumblebee to get comfortable in the garage. These are 2 characters who should be afraid of each other, and even though Charlie's talking really calmly and sweetly to Bumblebee, she still has this really reserved and fearful side of this interaction because she's talking to an alien robot with guns for hands. And I like how hard it is for her to get information out of Bumblebee. Even though I said I don't necessarily agree with the decision to have Bee lose his voice this early, the scene makes up for it by having these 2 figure out how to communicate with each other. Charlie takes a while to answer Bee's questions because she doesn't know what he's trying to ask, and Bee doesn't know how to ask them without words, so they're learning together how to talk. But hands down, the best part of the scene, and what would undoubtedly be the best part of the movie if none of the Cybertron stuff was in it, is the way in which Bumblebee gets his name.
You sound like a little bumblebee.
It's just a really well done moment that I find myself appreciating more and more upon rewatches, and it helps that the chemistry between these two never falters. It remains consistent throughout the movie, and is actually one of the only aspects of the movie that I think remains this good from start to finish. But what's next is the introduction to our main villains, Shatter and Dropkick. A scene that I actually find much more memorable for this moment.
Run a divorce, Roy!
Come on, Amber, give me one good reason.
You tried to sleep with my sister!
Unsuccessfully?
Than I do for anything involving the actual Decepticons. Now, I believe Shatter and Dropkick are named on screen once in the movie, but it's easily missable. They are also, fun fact, original creations for this movie, for some reason. There are so many Transformers characters they could have picked from, and so many that weren't in the Michael Bay movies, and yet they chose to invent these two clowns. Now, I do think their designs are superb, especially Shatter. She is one of my favorite live-action Transformer designs, period. And they're also triple changers, which is an awesome concept that I don't think any of the Transformers movies, including this one, did nearly enough with. That said, I don't really like them. I mean, they serve their purpose in the story, but they don't do anything memorable or of consequence in the whole movie. It honestly feels like the initial draft of the script forgot to have bad guys in it, and then they went back and just said, whoopsie, here's some, and then invented these two idiots. They really do feel like an afterthought in this story, and if you rewatch Bumblebee, you'll notice how little of the movie these two are actually in. And I get the idea of wanting to have Decepticons that are actually deceptive and treacherous and not just mindless monsters, but when you've seen stuff like this, it just makes whatever these two lugnuts are doing so uncool. Shatter and Dropkick's entire role in the movie, and I'm not kidding, is to stand in the S7 base and research where Bumblebee might be, while Haley Steinfeld and the CGI robot dick around in San Francisco for 90 minutes. And it just makes them so lame. Compare that to how active and prominent the Decepticons were in the previous movies, and it just makes these two fall completely flat as antagonists. I mentioned it earlier, and I'm going to again. I think the narrative of this movie would have been much better if Shatter and Dropkick were the muscle and the actual villain was Starscream. Going out of your way to invent two completely new Transformers who are only there to be filler and having an unnamed Decepticon rip out Bumblebee's voice box is completely unnecessary if you just put Starscream, or any major Decepticon for that matter, into the movie. Bumblebee and Starscream is a rivalry that just makes sense, and Starscream was considered a joke for years because of the Michael Bay movies, and this could have been an opportunity to give him a character that lives up to his awesome design. But no, there's 4 robots in the movie. One of them is Bumblebee, the other 2 are nothing characters, and the last one isn't even named and dies in the first 10 minutes. Having all 3 of Megatron's lieutenants together at the start of the movie, and then not putting them in the rest of this movie or at all in the next movie is undoubtedly one of the reasons these movies failed. Now, unlike the Bay films, I really won't have much to talk about regarding the second act of this movie because there isn't much exciting stuff that happens in the second act of this movie. We get a lot of scenes of Charlie and Bumblebee hanging out, and we get a few scenes of Shatter and Dropkick dicking around, but that's really it. I will say, the scene in the forest is something worth noting though. Now, I have not mentioned it until now, but Bumblebee has amnesia in this story. Blitzwing kicked his ass so hard that he forgot why he's on Earth. Now in this scene, Charlie fixes a piece of Bumblebee and it activates the message from Optimus. A message that is so cool. But something about Bee's response to this, everything about Bee's response to this feels off to me. Now this message triggers Bumblebee to remember at least some of what his mission is, and granted, he doesn't know that there are more Decepticons on Earth. But I feel like there should be a moment where it hits him that he's on an assignment and Optimus Prime is coming. But he just kind of goes back to chilling in the garage and watching movies. Now this is, in my opinion, the Bumblebee movie's biggest problem. Bee is just not active in his own story at all until the very end. And you really start to feel the effects of that as the movie goes on. Back in Charlie's garage for the second time, we get a scene that mostly works, despite the fact that this is the movie's biggest example of wanting to shove the 80s period down your throat so hard that it hurts. I can excuse part of it, because they obviously have to play a song to make sure that the radio and the cassette player work. They don't need to play 3 very famous 80s songs to prove that the radio and the cassette work. This part will always be funny though.
Try this.
Never gonna give you up.
And I do kind of get a kick out of Bee watching The Breakfast Club. I'm okay giving this a little bit of a pass, just because they call back to it later and I think it's a goofy moment. But there's so much, like we see Charlie go through the cassettes, we see Bee go through the VHSs, we see Charlie go through the record players. We get it. It's the 1980s. Maybe it's just because I wasn't alive in the 80s, so that's why it annoys me. But I hate this Hollywood trend of making different time periods a personality trait. It actually pisses me off. But the important part of this scene is that Bee plays the tape of Charlie's dive meet, a very meaningful memory she has of her dad that is the reason she both won't open up and won't dive anymore. It's a great character moment that is not only sold by Haley Steinfeld's incredible performance, but also Bumblebee's. I mean, I shouldn't be surprised that Travis Knight knows how to make an animated character work. Now I think there is a really cool thematic connection between Charlie not wanting to open up and Bee literally being unable to. I also can't ignore the fact that each of them has a message left by their father figure. Charlie has that dive meet tape and Bumblebee has the message from Optimus Prime. I'm telling you, character-wise and thematically, this movie is the pinnacle of the Transformers franchise. The failings are not with those two at all. And it's only enhanced by the fact that Haley Steinfeld is acting her ass off in this film. Can I please have some more John Cena?
They literally call themselves Decepticons. That doesn't set off any red flags?
Thank you. Where are we at? Oh, Memo. Memo's fine. I don't really have any problems with Memo. I think Memo's fun. My only real issue with Memo is that the movie should have brought him into the story like half an hour ago. We get some really fun moments with this trio, and Memo has an awesome amount of charisma and charm, and not having him and Haley Steinfeld interact until halfway through the movie is a massive missed opportunity. And in terms of character moments, there's the whole dive scene. Now, when I saw this in theaters, this was the moment in the movie where I had to remind myself that this movie is not doing whatever the fuck the Bay films were busy doing.
Oh, you're cute. Name's Willie. Yeah. Say my name. Say my name.
Now, with absolutely no help from Bumblebee, the asshole bullies from the start of the movie try to convince Charlie to jump off a cliff. By the way, there are only 2 needle drops in this movie I actually like. One of them is at the end, and the other one is this.
You got the power.
Now, of course, Charlie can't do the jump. And we get this insane thing that you could say to someone.
This car is an embarrassment. You should have your dad buy you a better one.
Amazed that Charlie didn't snap and have Bee start killing people. You know how evil I would be if I had a car that could turn into a robot? But I guess Charlie does at least get some revenge. Bee throws all the TP, Bee rubs all the eggs across the car, but the best thing Bee does, the thing that Bee should not get in trouble for, and what is, in my opinion, not enough revenge, Bee completely smashes this girl's car. Hell yeah, Bee, we stan a king. Also, that girl is just Rachel McAdams in Mean Girls. Nothing else to say, she just is. Now, the next chunk of the movie to me is unfortunately where its very small cast and very simple premise begins to catch up to its runtime. Now, I do think the chase is cool and super creative. I like the way Bee transforms different parts of his body to get out of the situation, but he's not yet skilled enough to do something like eject them and then jump up in the air, catch them, do a somersault, and transform again. But I really think this chase should have had a Decepticon in it. A single cop provides more opposition to the main characters than the actual villains of the movie. And I think Bee walking through the house and completely destroying it is a really fun moment, but there's 45 minutes left in the movie, and there's not a single character doing anything remotely connected to any sort of main plot. And yes, I do think that Bumblebee shoving his finger into a power socket and that being what reveals his location to Shatter and Dropkick is the dumbest possible way that you could have had that happen. This is what I mean when I say the Decepticons are an afterthought. You just had a scene where Bumblebee, running from a cop in a high-speed chase, transforms part of his body to escape, and the cop watches. The Decepticons are wired into the entire Earth communication grid. Why didn't you have them learn about where Bumblebee is from them intercepting that cop's radio signal? Bee getting taken prisoner is the thing that brings us into the third act of this movie. And while I think the third act fixes some of the issues I have, it also opens up a batch of new ones, and in fact, some of my biggest criticisms of the movie come from the third act of it. In terms of positives, the characters finally go from being reactive to active. That means that instead of taking a back seat and watching the plot unfold, they're the ones that are actually driving the story forward. Shatter and Dropkick also get to finally do something and be actual villains from here on out instead of background characters. Everything just gets a little more exciting at this point. I really haven't talked about Charlie's family, have I? I probably should, considering how important they are to Charlie. I like her stepdad, I think he's funny, and I just personally have always gotten a kick out of the archetype that is so nice that they loop back around into kind of being an asshole. I feel like Otis is fine in the scenes he's in, but I think he's a character who should have met Bumblebee and actually, like, hung out with him in the movie. I don't like Charlie's mom. Like, every time she's on screen, I just get upset and wish Bumblebee was on screen punching something, but oh yeah, Bumblebee doesn't really punch stuff in this movie. But overall, the Watson family just is very unnecessary for this movie. I know you can't really cut them out of the movie, but their lack of anything resembling actual importance becomes so apparent in the third act. I know I sound like a broken record with how much I've mentioned the Bay films, but it's kind of upsetting that the movie made during a writer's strike implements the main character's parents better than the 1980s Spielberg family movie homage. And much like the cop, Charlie's family is just more of a problem than the Decepticons. And speaking of the Decepticons, the best they get in the whole movie is when they torture Bumblebee. I like that the movie lets loose and shows these characters for what they truly are. And I like that Shatter and Dropkick are now actually working towards something. And I like Dropkick's gun that turns people into goo.
Oh, you have to stop them.
Ow!
Does that gun one-shot everybody? Like, does that work on Cybertronians also? Like, why is Dropkick on Earth on the Bumblebee recovery mission when he could be on Cybertron one-shotting everyone and single-handedly winning the war? And much like E.T., Bumblebee dies here. The movie's 43 years old. You deserve to be spoiled that E.T. dies at this point. Don't worry though, he does leave and he gets back on his spaceship and he flies away and the government loses and the bikes fly and it's really awesome. You should go watch it. But he only dies for like a minute and then Charlie brings him back to life. And while the concept of Bumblebee dying is a bit rocky since we know he's not gonna die before the end of his own movie, it at least works as a death and the emotions are there. Unlike the next movie that Bumblebee gets killed in. My point is that it doesn't feel like shock value. I think this story is actually greatly enhanced by having Bumblebee get killed. You need to feel Charlie's loss, and I think you do. And I love this shot of him sitting up. I just have to talk about it. I think that's really awesome. But the scene I actually love is the scene right after this, when Sector 7 pulls up. Because we get an insanely chilling concept. John Cena throws Charlie to the ground, and Bumblebee, who has been very weak and helpless and has been barely able to move in this scene, does this. This part pops the hell off. I like that it's that easy for a Transformer to switch if they're bonded enough with someone, and I think Bee wreaking havoc is perfect parts terrifying and exciting, but the coolest aspect of the whole scene is the initial moment when Bee and Charlie lock eyes, and you find yourself wondering if there's any Bumblebee left in there. But once Charlie snaps him out of it in a moment that feels like what the last night was trying to do, Bumblebee decides that it's finally time for this Transformers movie to go have some Transformers in it, and he's gonna go kick ass. Finally, some robot-on-robot action. And I like that you can feel Bumblebee's sense of duty. He knows he's outmatched and is probably gonna die, but Optimus gave him an order and he's gonna fulfill it. Alright, so the third act has a few different things going on. So we have Bumblebee fighting Shatter and Dropkick. Obviously that has to happen. We have Haley Steinfeld climbing up the tower. And we have Charlie's family doing... what exactly? I know they're technically buying Charlie time, but why? What about these characters has led to this abrupt switch? They don't know what the car is. They don't know what Charlie's going to do. They don't know what Shatter and Dropkick are up to. All they know is that the government is still looking for Charlie and the car, and she's on the loose. So them completely switching to being on Charlie's side here makes no sense. Besides, I guess, just having Ron drive a car through an intersection so that Charlie won't hate him anymore. And we're not in the clear yet, because as far as I'm concerned, Charlie should not be in this scene either. I think you can still have her do the dive and get the emotional payoff without her actually being present for the final battle. I think it would have been a far more exciting chase if instead of Charlie's parents just doing nothing of consequence, because John Cena shows up anyway, if the goal was for Bumblebee to get Charlie to her parents so that she wasn't in danger. You can't just have your main character at the final battle because they're the main character. Hell, The Last Knight, for all of its faults, understood this. Well, kind of. Cade doesn't need to be there, but Vivian does, so I'm counting it. But as for the main point of the third act, Bumblebee finally fighting some Decepticons, it's a pretty dope fight. I've always loved this shot. I love the way B uses his vehicle mode as a weapon. I love that even though the Transformers are much shorter than they are in the Bay films, when they fight, they still feel big and destructive, and they just absolutely shred the environment. And we have to talk about the fucking phenomenal way in which Bumblebee kills Dropkick.
You think these little chains can hold?
Now, the Dropkick fight is considered the main one. It's longer and bigger, but I think the Shatter fight is actually the cooler action scene. I like that Shatter's a lot more strategic and calculated in her strikes. Dropkick was just kind of punch and be. Shatter's whole goal seems to be to dismantle Bumblebee as quickly and effectively as possible. And then you have Bumblebee, who's not ready for this level of skill and is just hoping to God that something works. But I hate Shatter's death. I've always hated Shatter's death. When I first saw it, I was like baffled that of the 3 Decepticon deaths in the movie, hers is the only one that's not cool. Like, I vividly remember thinking, so Dropkick gets the chain to the transformation and then gets pulled apart, and Shatter gets hit by a boat that somehow leaves Bumblebee unharmed. Yep, that makes sense. And no, movie, you don't get to do 2 fake-out deaths on the same character in the same movie. You already did your death fake-out, you don't get a second one. And I love the completion of a character arc as much as the next guy, but what was the point of Charlie diving into the water? Was it just to, like, convince B to not die? Was B just planning on staying under there? What was the game plan from both characters here? I do like the shot of their hands coming up out of the water, though. That's awesome. I love that stuff. And John Cena gets his hero moment, and he also gets a little payoff to the Breakfast Club scene from earlier. And that brings us to the farewell.
You stay. I go.
Shit, wrong movie.
Right here.
I'm trying, guys. It keeps playing the wrong movie.
Thank you
So much.
for giving me my voice.
Alright, movie, you can have some points. That one's pretty good. I like how that pays off everything. B's arc, Charlie's arc, B literally learning how to speak, Charlie and B learning how to open up to each other, all of it. Everything in the movie is paid off with that. The movie then does go ahead and pretend it's a prequel by doing this shit.
No way.
Whatever, it's a cool car, I'm happy. If nothing else, it makes you want to rewatch the original movie. So, that's a win. We get that awesome shot of the objects in mirror or closer than they appear tag with Charlie reflected while B plays Don't You Forget About Me. And then, in what is the perfect ending to any movie ever, Bumblebee meets up with Optimus Prime and the two of them drive side by side. The fuck you mean that's not the end of the movie? So the perfect way to end this movie should be those two icons driving next to each other after an entire movie apart. I don't know why you wouldn't end it there. But instead we get this last scene of Charlie returning to her family and Memo that accomplishes nothing. There's no new ground being covered in this scene. So I don't know why you would include that, and why the last shot of the movie before credits is the human characters instead of the robots. And while I love this line,
My name is
Bumblebee.
and seeing the two of them talk, I would have much rather we just not have this at all. Same goes with the tag of Charlie fixing her dad's car and finally driving off. Like, these scenes isolated on their own are great things to have in the movie, but they don't do anything we hadn't already established, and it takes away from what I think is the best ending for a Transformers movie that you could possibly have. My thoughts on Bumblebee have changed a lot over the years. When this movie came out, I really dug it, but as time goes on, I find myself liking it less and less. It feels like a movie that's trying to be everything the Bay movies weren't, and in December of 2018, that was amazing, but now, 7 years, holy shit, 7 years later, Bumblebee already feels dated, whereas its predecessors are getting better with time. I describe this movie as beautifully frustrating because while there's so much to love, like Haley Steinfeld and her dynamic with Bumblebee and John Cena absolutely understanding the assignment, there is so much this movie leaves to be desired. The villains are an afterthought. There's so much stuff that exists just to pad out the runtime, and the movie doesn't even have a plot until just over halfway through. It's at its best when it's doing things you wouldn't expect to see in a Transformers movie, but it is a Transformers movie. I feel like what I want this movie to be and what this movie thinks I want it to be conflict into something that was a welcome change of pace after 10 years of acid-induced excess, but that's all it is. A change of pace. And I find myself wondering if this movie would have reviewed as positively if it came out now. Maybe my thoughts on this movie would still be as positive as they used to be if Paramount and Hasbro actually did something with the IP to bank off of its critical reception. In 10 years, we got 5 Bay films. It's been 7 years since Bumblebee came out, and we've only gotten one other film in that continuity. And oh boy, do I have some thoughts on it. I'll see you guys next time.